these Islams which we are observing, the difference is they have a set of tradition, they have a set scholarship which they adhere to. This is not a bad thing, but we are offering a kind of an alternative to this traditionalism. Introducing Quranist Islam. Quranist Islam is not about who gets to go to heaven. Okay, if you look at religious discourse, this is essentially what it's about. People say stuff like, okay, well, you know what, if you join us, we are the safe sect. In fact, they quote you a hadith which says, okay, there are 71 sects for the Jews, 72 for the Christians, and 73 for the Muslims. And the one sect for the Muslims is the one which follows the Quran and Sunnah. Unfortunately, many parties claim that, more than one party claims that. And so, you know, it kind of falls on its face. Quranist Islam is also not about being anti-hadith or anti-sunnah. In fact, I think this is a point of honesty about Quranists. When Quranists say, we use Quran alone, this is not exactly true. In fact, the founder of Deen Research Center, who's very pro-Quran, his name is Arnold Moore, he said, Quran alone is essentially the Quran in the cupboard alone. There's no reader. When you read the Quran, you inevitably bring your own preconceptions, your own tendencies, your own styles to the book. That's not a bad thing. The only thing is, when you do so, you have to ask yourself, is it contradictory to the spirit of the Quran or not? To me, if it does, then that source is simply invalid. So no source should be authoritative on you. You should be able to decide for yourself. To me, if a hadith proves useful to understand the Quran, I would use it. But unfortunately, I don't find many hadith to that effect. Quranist Islam is about authority. We don't subscribe to any authority. Some guy can come and say, in fact, today we're going to promote the work of a great scholar, in my opinion, but we're also going to criticize his work. That's how we should go, I think. We should take what is useful and reject what is not useful. So Quranist Islam is a space where authorities are not valid. We do not say, okay, this person is an authority in this field, therefore we must listen to him. Okay, usually people use the metaphor. They say, well, to be a surgeon, you need to study 20 years, etc., and therefore we're not qualified to challenge the surgeon, etc. There are people who die on the surgeon's table, though. So really, authority is not just a matter of claim; it has to be a matter of effect. So who has the authority to interpret the Quran? In the Quranist space, you do. Because, let's face it, it's you who's going to meet Allah on Judgment Day. So, if you meet Allah and Allah then asks you, why did you follow this particular path? And you say, well, my scholar said so. That's unfortunately not good enough. You need to actually have a substantiation for what it is you're following. And this is what we're here for. Authority to interpret in traditional Islam. Traditional Islam is the opposite of this. If you check the media, the authority belongs to scholars. When they ask someone's opinion on, let's say, suicide bombing, if they ask Dr. Qardawi, for example, Yusuf Qardawi, he would say that it's justified in some places and not justified in others. You see, so these people, they speak for Islam, and they don't exactly give us any kind of a democratic right to speak. So the media goes to these scholars, and these scholars effectively misrepresent Islam. So that is, unfortunately, the authority to interpret in traditional Islam. Is this fair? Of course not. We all have opinions about Islam. If you ask the Muslim on the street about some things which Muslims are accused of doing, he would feel rather slighted, rather hurt, rather offended. But because he does not have the voice, he is not able he's not able to be heard. And what about disagreement? Scholars are not unanimous in everything. In fact, if you ask them some very basic facts, some basic notions on which hadith is authentic and which is not, they will usually disagree on it. But it's okay as long as they disagree on it. We can't disagree with that. So that's another thing which Quranists disagree with. So who should have the authority to interpret the Quran? And the answer to that question is why we're here. We believe in your democratic right to interpret the Quran. Today, I will present something on homosexuality in the Quran. I welcome all criticisms. So you're most welcome to say, I'm sorry, this is rubbish. You're most welcome to say that. Because I'm not an authority. Well, I'm simply a person sharing my views. And if you disagree with my views, that's absolutely fine. That's what this space is for. How much of the Quran is in traditional Islam? And I think this is a very vital question because, you know, when you say Islam, the Quran is said to be the first source of Sharia. So, you know, when you talk to people from outside our tradition, they usually think, oh, okay, you know what? Whatever these Muslims do, it's actually from the Quran. And they might be very surprised. Check out the apostasy law. That is absolutely not in the Quran. In fact, if anything, it's the opposite of what the Quran says. Yet, if you ask an average Muslim on the street, what happens to apostates in Islam? You say, well, they get the chop. That is very unfortunate. But there again, this is the image which is being put forward. You see, we expect the Quran to be the backbone of Islam, but really it's not. Over the top reverence of the Prophet. This is also not in the Quran. You know, you've seen events where Muslims go into some kind of a religious frenzy, you know, claiming that the Prophet is now with them. You know, then they start singing all sorts of devotional songs to the Prophet, etc. These kind of things are not in the Quran. The Quran in chapter 18 verse 110 says, the Prophet is commanded to say, Ana basharun mithlukum, I am a man like you. So again, he's not asking for this sort of reverence which the Muslims give it. So in effect, in traditional Islam, it is my understanding that the Quran is only the titular first source. It is only the first source in the title. It's not in practice the first source. Usually the Quran is backgrounded, abrogated, specified, or explained away. There is much of the Quran which is simply ignored in the substantiation of traditional Islam. So we believe that Quranist Islam is the antidote. For Quranists, it's the only authority in Islam. That's why, even though Quranists have major disagreements, you will never find a Quranist saying that there is compulsion in Islam. You can compel people to join Islam. You will never find that. Quranists are usually very much advocates of peace. They're not jihadis, for example. And the reason for that is the Quran is unequivocally clear on those major points. So the Quran guarantees freedom of religion and belief. The Prophet is seen as a deliverer of the Quran. Now this is not to denigrate the Prophet's opinion on what the Quran is, but we have to ask the question, does hadith represent the Prophet? Or does it represent years and years of history given the Prophet's legitimization in order to gain authority? And whatever it is the Prophet teaches, his divinely sanctioned teachings are in the Quran. Now this again is a surprise to some people because they believe that the Quran are the teachings of Allah and the hadith are the teachings of the Prophet. But in the Quran, you will find numerous instances where the Prophet is commanded to say, Kul huwallahu ahad. Say, He is Allah, one. So initially to the Muslim community, who says this? It's the Prophet who says this to the Muslims. So these are the sayings of the Prophet. And they are divinely sanctioned. In other words, Allah protected these sayings. That's why you'll find no dispute. There's no Muslim who would say, well, you know what, I think this ayah is weak, this ayah is not sahih, etc. You will never find that because the Quran is the protected source. All Muslims recognize this. The problem is, it's being explained by sources which are less protected and thus able to be distorted.